Hello everybody and welcome back. In this video we're going to be learning why you should buy Octane Render for Cinema 4D. Now basically this is going to be a video where I'm going to start going through and telling you the pros and cons of Octane Render and why I think you should buy it and also why I think some people shouldn't buy it. So this is going to be a really good kind of introductory video if you're never really heard of Octane before and you're kind of on the fence about buying it, which brings up my first slide. Who is this video for? This video is for anybody who's on the fence about buying Octane Render, just not sure if it's worth having or whether it would benefit them or not. And it's also for that person who happens to work at a studio or a company or somewhere where you really want Octane Render, but you just are having trouble convincing your boss to buy it. So go ahead and send him this video, and I'll do my best to convince him and let him get educated, make an educated decision on whether it's something that you should have at your studio or not. But to begin, let's go ahead and start with Octane can make and save you money while making work easier. This is one of the big selling points of Octane Render, and I'm going to go ahead and tell you how it can achieve this, because this is a pretty big statement. It can make and save you money while making work easier. That's a pretty nice thing. I think all of us can agree we'd like to have something like that. So how can Octane achieve this? Well, to kind of narrow all this down, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the pros and cons of Octane Render. One of the big first pro is Octane is fast and realistic. This is pretty big. The second one is Octane runs on GPUs. This is both a pro and a con, and we'll be talking about more of that later, and we'll kind of dive into why that is. But one of the main pros and cons that makes this up is it's a much faster and cheaper than CPU rendering. This is a big pro. This is because GPU rendering is simply, like this says here, is faster and it's cheaper than if you're using a CPU. So that's definitely, again, a big benefit. We also have must-load geometry into the VRAM of your graphic card. We'll be learning about this too. This is definitely a con. We are limited to how big our scene can be by how big and beefy our graphic card's VRAM is. We also need to understand that this is a newer technology with a smaller feature set. This is a con. Now this feature set is getting bigger and bigger by the day, and they're constantly adding more and more features. And by the time you're watching this video, a lot of the issues that Octane has here that I'm going to mention that some of its feature sets are limited might no longer be an issue anymore, so I'd go ahead and look them up if I bump into something that you're unsure about. Next up is Octane has affordable pricing options. This is a big benefit. Even if you aren't a $1 million studio, there is some really affordable pricing options, even monthly payment options like $20 a month payments that you can do to rent Octane Render for your studio. So a lot of options here. Next, Octane has a fast and powerful workflow. This is a huge benefit to Octane, definite pro. And finally, Octane is hard to learn due to very little documentation. This is a con. Now this is a con that I plan on scrubbing off of this list with my Octane Master Course, which we're going to be learning a little bit about more towards the end of this video. But again, my Master Course's goal is to make the process of learning Octane easy, quick, and simple. It will be a step-by-step process, just like this video, where you will learn everything you've ever wanted to know about Octane Render. So to start, let's go ahead and begin at the very top up here. Octane is fast and realistic. This again is a definite pro. And let's go ahead and talk about why that is by comparing Octane Render versus the physical render in speed and quality. Let's go ahead and actually see how much faster is Octane Render compared to other render engines like the physical render, which in this case I think is going to be a perfect example because for most C4D users, this is what you have right now, especially for users thinking of upgrading to Octane. You're probably like, do I really want to leave the physical render? How much faster can Octane be? I've heard it's fast, but really, how much faster? Well, let's go ahead and find out. I also want to mention that this is Octane Render rendered inside Cinema 4D, right? So this is with the plugins. You're going to have Cinema 4D rendering and physical render, and inside Cinema 4D, this is Cinema 4D rendering with the Octane plugin. So let's go ahead and see how much quicker it is. To start, this is the Cinema 4D physical render. This render here took 55 minutes long. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at an Octane render. This is an Octane render. This Octane render took 5 minutes. This is 11 times faster than the physical render did, though. Notice, too, look at my caustic's reflection on the floor here. Here's the Cinema 4D physical render. See how sharp my caustics are here, which is for my Octane render. Notice how kind of blurry and diffuse they are. This is actually a good thing. This is more realistic. Notice that my sphere is really rough and blurry. This means having sharp caustics like this doesn't actually really make sense. How would the caustics come through this object so clearly if our object is this rough? This is simply a limit to the physical render, and it's simply not able to do this calculation. Octane, on the other hand, is able to do it, and it's able to do it faster than the physical render ever could. Here is an example of Octane pulling off the correct caustics of how it would look for the Cinema 4D render if the physical render did it correctly. So if the physical render was to get this type of caustics out and do it physically correct, it should not have any roughness on the sphere here, just like Octane is showing here. Here was a sphere without any roughness, giving us that caustics that look just like that. This render here took 5 minutes long. Next up, here is the physical render rendering some Ludwig trees. Now, I might have pronounced that name incorrectly, but it's a really great site that has a plugin. It's called the Ludwig Plant Browser, I believe, and you can basically use that to put in all kinds of trees into your scene. They have a ton of them, and this is from that free pack. Now, they've already been pre-textured, so this is great for different render speeds. So this is the Cinema 4D physical render. It took 15 minutes, and this was using the Cinema 4D physical materials. Now this is the Octane render textures on those same trees, and this took 3 minutes. This is 5 times faster than the physical render. Now, we're losing a little bit of ground here on Octane. Notice this wasn't quite as fast. Well, what's interesting to note is we're actually getting a lot more realism out of this render on top of that. Notice in the Cinema 4D render, we don't have any subsurface scattering, and we're basically clipping down to pure black where there's no light able to get inside here. With Octane, on the other hand, every single leaf has subsurface scattering, and light is able to pass through the leaf and globally illuminate the inside of these trees and inside the branches here. You can see that this adds a whole lot more life and realism to our render. So this is before, more dead, less real looking, and this is after. Much more life is added to this. Much more light has been pumped into our scene with this global illumination. So basically, we are getting a much more realistic scene with a faster render time. So that's a big, big plus right there. Next up, this is the Cinema 4D physical render. This took 1 hour and 20 minutes. Now we're stepping onto the field where Octane really starts to take advantage. Octane render does incredible with blurry depth of field scenes here. Now, you've all probably tried this with the Cinema 4D physical render, and you're probably all cringing because you know that having big depth of field bokeh like this does equal a very high render time. With Octane render, this is not the case. Let's go ahead and see what we got out of that. This render took 5 minutes. This is 16 times faster than the physical render took. Because remember, we took 1 hour and 20 minutes for this, and this took 5 minutes. And quite honestly, the bottom one looks better. Know why? Because we have better global illumination. Notice the tint of blue that we're getting on our floor, and our floor's white color is helping tint onto the cube. So the cube's color, right here, notice the cube's color blue, is helping tint the floor a little blue because the light is bouncing off of it. This is much more realistic. Also notice the better reflections we're getting on the top of our cubes over here too. So again, it renders faster and it looks better, much more physically accurate. Next up, let's go ahead and up our ante. So far, we've been looking with some pretty simple geometry, right? It's just been a bunch of cubes and maybe a few trees. But let's go ahead and up the ante. Can Octane Render handle really high polygon scenes? Does it start to fall apart there? Here is 3 2 million poly barns. Each barn, this is a 3D scan that I did myself, and you can see it's very high poly, and each barn is made up of 2 million polygons, over 2 million polygons. This is totaling over 6 million polys in this scene alone right here. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. Now, this is the physical render with some global illumination settings, and you can see this took 12 minutes to render. Really not that bad. Now, I want to point out, I'm not doing any instancing. These are simply copies. There's no cloning or anything going on. This is 3 raw geometry barns. So this is a legit 6 million polygons in our scene. So let's go ahead and see how Octane handles this. It handles it quite well. It does it in 3 minutes at 4 times faster than the physical render. That's pretty good, right? I mean, we're not really doing anything super impressive here, so it's about 4 times faster. It looks good. Quite honestly, I'd be willing to bet Octane does a little bit better at getting some more global illumination back in here, a little bit more bounces, but again, quite honestly, they both look just as good in my opinion. There's really no clear winner here. Octane, in my book, is a little bit nicer though because it did do it 4 times faster, so that is nice. But what if we up the ante? Because again, this is still a pretty simple scene. What if we make a bunch of barns? Now, in this, these are all instances. These are all clones. This is basically a cloner with render instances checked on. So we have a whole bunch of them everywhere. Now, this took an hour to calculate all these different points of that light bouncing around with global illumination with Cinema 4D. That took a long time. How long would it take us if we did this in Octane render? 2.5 minutes. This is over 24 times faster than the physical render performed. This is immensely powerful. You can already see the benefits of Octane render right here. And yes, look at the difference between these renders. They both look just as good. If anything, Octane looks a little better, and it did it so much quicker. Imagine if you were rendering an animation. I'll tell you right now, I would not want to do this with the physical render when Octane can put out something better that really is so much dang quicker. Imagine how much time and money you can save with this. Now you may notice that right now this render time took 2.5 minutes, where the old Octane render took 3 minutes. So why is it faster with more geometry? Don't worry, I simply stopped the render sooner because with here, Cinema 4D was taking so long, I just stopped it on an hour flat, and I just kept watching it until Octane looked like its quality was up to where the Cinema 4D render was. So adding the more geometry did not make the render go quicker. I just simply lowered the quality that I was willing to accept to pump out to match Cinema 4D, if that makes sense. So because Cinema 4D took so long to get a quality at this level, I went ahead and stopped Octane early because it already achieved that level of quality at that point. So just realize more geometry didn't actually make this render faster. I just simply lowered the quality standard that Octane had to reach. Now, next up, let's go ahead and see how Octane does with some fire. So this is a Turbulence FD render. This is a plugin that you can get for Cinema 4D, and this is rendered with the default Turbulence FD renderer that comes with the plugin in Cinema 4D. Now this took a minute. Let's go ahead and see what Octane does. Now this is actually quite surprising, much slower. This took 4 minutes to render. This is 4 times slower than Turbulence FD for Cinema 4D did. Now this might be very surprising for you. Why was this so much slower? Now there's a really good reason for that. If you compare, this is the Turbulence FD, and this is the Octane render. First off, you're already going to be aware, the Octane render one looks much more pretty. This is because the Octane render has true volumetric light emitting from the fire and lighting up part of the floor. It also has true light subsurface scattering going through the clouds and smoke. This is stuff that the Turbulence FD render simply just does not have. There's no way to have the fire actually emit light. Only the Octane render is capable of doing that. So yes, we are sacrificing some speed, but we are getting much better quality. Now, on the other hand, what if we were willing to compare these in a more apples-to-apples approach? Same quality level. This is that same Octane render, but with a huge reduction in the amount of light that's able to emit off of it, and like basically completely cut back on that subsurface scattering through the smoke and reducing the amount of light that we are able to basically emit from the fire there. And this brings our render time down to 45 seconds, equaling 1.3 times faster than Turbulence FD. So right now we're already seeing a pretty mediocre speed increase, but again, it is faster. And if you compare both of them, in my opinion, at a faster speed, the Octane render one still looks better. Quite honestly, in my opinion, I feel like Octane renders looks better. But again, leave this up to you. Which one do you like better? So again, if you're a studio that does a ton of fire simulations, this Octane render could be something for you, right? Because this is gorgeous looking fire explosions right here with true light. So if you need that level of quality, Octane render is a good step to go because you simply can't achieve this with the Turbulence FD render. So this might be a step that you want to go. this said. If this quality is perfect for you and you feel like it's enough and you want to keep your speed and you're just simply buying Octane Render for the speed, maybe the price isn't worth it. I'll leave that kind of up to you, but you're only shaving off about, you're going from a minute to 45 seconds a frame. Maybe you feel like that's enough. Kind of leave that up to you. So if you're just a fire rendering company, maybe this might not be too worth the upgrade. But again, I'll leave that decision up to you. Next up, Octane runs on GPUs. Again, this is full of some pros and some cons. Let's go ahead and start breaking this down. To begin, let's go ahead and talk about my PC build really quick. I'm going to go ahead and talk about what I used to render all of those test renders with. So all those comparisons of C4D physical render versus Octane render. What was I using? Because again, I could have totally faked this whole thing, right? If I had a like $5,000 Quadro is my graphic card in Octane, but only had like a $100 CPU, of course it's going to be so much faster. So what do I actually have hardware-wise? Well, my hardware I used for Octane is an EVGA GeForce 970 GPU, and at the time of making this slide, it was priced at $335. Now, let me point out too, this was before the cryptocurrency boom, so this was a much more fair and accurate determining price for this GPU. It's not under the cryptocurrency boom where the graphic card prices blew up, so this was priced before then, so you don't have to worry about that. And this is the CPU that I use. It is a i7-4790K 4 gigahertz quad-core CPU, originally priced also for $350. So they both came out around the same time and were both priced around the same. If anything, my graphic card was a little cheaper. So again, you're really seeing cheaper pay for better performance. So again, this is, I felt like was a very fair comparison because again, they're both priced around the same because again, price keeps it fair because again, these is not apples to apples. These are two very different pieces of hardware. So the only thing we can really compare them on power-wise is how much we're paying for them. Because a CPU score is not something you're going to be able to match to a GPU score. They're completely different. So next up, let's go ahead and start with the first pro. It's a much faster and cheaper than CPU rendering. So again, GPU rendering is faster and cheaper than CPU rendering. And let's go ahead and start seeing by how much. I'm going to go ahead and make this pricing comparison based off of this render. This is only 4 times faster. Remember this one? This is a pretty small, mediocre performance gain compared to what we were getting in some other cases where we're getting like 24 times faster. So let's go ahead and take this scene, even though it's a smaller one. I want to give Octane kind of a run for its money, you know. I'm going to give Octane kind of one of its worst case scenarios. I'm not going to let Octane have its best case scenario here because the results are so impactful you're going to see here that I want to make sure you see it even in this small state. So again, this is one more of a mediocre setup, but let's go ahead and see how much money Octane can save you even in this, one of the worst case scenarios. So here we have 2 computers. Both of them have an i7-4790K, and both of them rendered this one, because we'll remember, in Cinema 4D, this render took 12 minutes to render, not 3 minutes. So this was 4 times faster than the Octane render, or sorry, than the Cinema 4D render, because 3 times 4 is 12. So again, say we're just using Cinema 4D, and this scene right here took 12 minutes for us to render. This is based off of that real-world result we had. Now just realize everything on from this point is going to be basically based off of math, not real-world result, because I don't have enough money to buy all the components that we're about to show on screen. But basically, here we go. Let's go ahead and say, okay, over here, this guy decides, okay, I'm going to upgrade and add a 970. That went ahead and raised my price up. Now, I've done a bunch of math back in the time when I did this. This is all based off of real-world values. I went ahead and did a bunch of calculations. I'm not going to show that here because it's way too much to talk about and way beyond the scope of this course. But just realize I've kept it very, very fair in comparing Octane's GPU pricing versus the CPU pricing, and I made sure that I got the best bang for your buck CPU as possible. And with the GPU, I kind of went a little splurgy, and I don't exactly do the best bang for your buck for power performance. So if anything, this is biasly in effect trying to support the CPU as much as I can. But without further ado, okay, we've gone ahead and upgraded to an E5 CPU version 4. And this has increased our price to $1,700 and dropped our render time to 10.6 minutes. Now this is based off of comparing the benchmark of my CPU versus the benchmark for this CPU, and from that point lowering the score based off of that, or the projected time to render based off of that. So now you can see both of them have spent money, and Octane is already way ahead. Now let's go ahead and spend a little bit more. Now we're dropping our render time down to 5.3 minutes. We're at $2,100 now because we bought a double motherboard that can support 2 CPUs. So on this one computer now, we are down to 5.3 minutes, and this one I haven't needed to upgrade because I'm still able to pump this out at 3 minutes, which is pretty nice. Now let's go ahead and do this again. Because it is so dang expensive to literally put in a bigger motherboard. Like, to have a motherboard that holds 4 slots is more expensive than simply just buying another computer like this. And bang for your buck, it is not worth it. So again, I'm trying to biasly give the CPUs the best possible chance. So now we're at $4,200 on this side. We have 2 computers hooked together, render farming together, with 4 CPUs in total, dropping our render down to 2.65 minutes. That we're actually ahead of Octane Render now. But again, we've spent $4,200 on this build, where our other one build over here is only $1,600. And don't worry, both computers have taken in account for the power supplies that they would need, the cooling that they would need, etc., the RAM, and all of that. Both of them are set with 16 gigs of RAM computers too. So let's go ahead and really up the ante on this. We're going to say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and give myself another 970 upgraded. Now we're at $2,000 on this build, and we're at 1.7 minutes for the render, whereas over here we are now at $8,400, dropping us down to 1.3 minutes. So we are actually rendering quicker over here, but Octane, on the other hand, is not very far behind, and we are a heck of a lot cheaper. Now let's go ahead and drop this down again. Let's say for entertainment's sake that we increase ourselves to 4 980 Ti's, and we've dropped our render now down to 49 seconds. Okay, over here we're at $4,500, and over here we're at $8,400. Let's go and see what we can do to counter this. We are going to heavily increase our computer build. We now have 2, 4, 6, 8 computers, all with these dual CPUs in there, all costing $2,100, and that's priced on the low side. I estimated low for them and estimated high for Octane, just to biasly give the CPU advantage. And you can see that at spending $16,800, we are getting a render time of 40 seconds. Or in Octane, at $4,500, we're getting a render time of 49 seconds. So basically, Octane Render, as you can see, even though we're 9 seconds slower here, we could easily pass that with another card if we wanted, or buying another separate computer, and we could literally cut that in half by buying another computer only $4,500. You can see that Octane Render is able to render faster, much cheaper. And this here is really a big example. $16,800 PC build with 8 of them versus just one simple computer. Well, not really too simple. It's got 4 980 Ti's in it at 49 seconds. $4,500 PC versus 8 $16,000 worth of computers. That's a big deal for me. So this is a big selling point on how Octane can save you money. Huge selling point in my opinion. Next up, GPUs are faster and cheaper than equally capable CPUs. That's the big ending point of this particular topic. Again, can't stress this enough. GPUs are just flat out faster and cheaper than equally capable CPUs. That's just kind of how they're built. They were originally built and meant for different tasks, and GPUs just happen to do rendering much quicker. Next up, let's talk about some cons. GPUs must load the geometry into VRAM. This is a con because when we take our scene in Octane, we must take that VRAM and we must take that geometry and load it into the VRAM of our graphic card. Now this is loaded into our VRAM, brought into Octane standalone, and then rendered back over. This takes time. In this particular instance, for this barn render, in this whole example I've done way up here, I'm just going to go ahead and back up. This whole example here, based off of time, did take this into account. So Octane was limited. This same barn render that we're doing for all that, based off of this whole system, is what I'm comparing right here. So you can see this took 23 seconds to load in VRAM and then 26 seconds to render out. This gives me a total render time of 49 seconds. So again, this is a con because we do have to spend 23 seconds loading this into our graphic card, and then we spend 26 seconds actually rendering out. So that took 49 seconds in this particular case. So what's interesting, though, is this load to VRAM only needs done if our object is moving around. So if our object is simply stationary and we're moving our camera around our barn, for example, we're panning around it, this only needs to be done once to load it into the VRAM, and after that it can just stay there and we can move the camera around the barn. This means the first render in our frame for our animation would take 23 seconds plus 26 seconds, taking a total of 49 seconds for the first frame. But after that, for the second frame, we already have this part done, so we can cross that off, and for that frame it'll only take 26 seconds to render through. So that means every frame after only will take 26 seconds to render this out. Much, much quicker. So really, this drawback isn't that big of a deal, and in most cases, especially animation, it's going to be even less of a problem. Unless, of course, you're animating the barn, but even at that point, it's still vastly quicker than any other alternative. So the speed that you're able to achieve, even though you do have to load this VRAM in, is still massively, massively quicker than anything you could achieve with CPU rendering. Next up is, again, this is another drawback of the VRAM, is you cannot load geometry larger than the VRAM you have in your GPU. This is a flat-out limitation. If, per se, this is not actually true, these three barns did not take up 5 gigs of geometry. This is a hypothetical situation. But say that they did. If these took up 5 gigs of geometry, say this was 5 gigs of geometry in data for the VRAM, our GPU over here, my 960, say I had, only has 4 gigs of VRAM. I don't actually have a 960, again, hypothetical situation. And this would not work, I'm afraid. You cannot stick more VRAM of geometry into a card that does not support it. It's just simply not going to fit, and it will not load the render. So if you have a scene that's so big that's over the amount of VRAM that you have on your card, you're simply not going to be able to render it. This is, of course, a huge limitation. So if you're a studio that has like scenes that you're trying to render out at once that are like 30 gigs in size, like 30 gigs of VRAM to literally load in, like if you have 16 gigs of RAM on your computer and it's just not enough, maybe Octane might not be a good option for you. I do know they do have some graphic cards out now, like the Quadros with 24 gigs of VRAM. But again, if you're loading massively big scenes, like some scenes are like 100 gigs, in buffer size, this may not work for you. Now, don't get me wrong, just because your scene file could be 100 gigs or something, that does not mean your VRAM is going to be 100 gigs. The storage of actual rendering and how it's being held into the RAM on your computer in a CPU sense, and the storage and how it's held in VRAM on the GPU, again, is not apples to apples, where this is apples to oranges. They are different. I've noticed that in the case of Octane, because it's so optimized at storing RAM, for example, the physical render or Arnold render engine that render on CPU, I've noticed that Octane takes up half as much VRAM. It needs half as much VRAM needed to render the same scene than if Arnold render it. So perfect example, if Arnold took 10 gigs of CPU RAM, just regular system RAM, and to hold your geometry in your scene, if, say, that took 10 gigs, Octane, on the other hand, would be around 5 to 6 gigs, so almost half. So it's interesting how much more capable Octane is in being very optimized and storing that in the graphic card. So they have been good with that. So this isn't usually too big of a problem, but I wanted to make sure you're aware of it. Next up, Octane render and GPU rendering in general is a newer technology with a smaller feature set. Now again, this feature set's deficiencies are depleting day by day. They're constantly improving it and adding new features, making it almost completely equal to CPU rendering, and we definitely will be there someday. We're not quite there yet, but we're definitely making some good ground. So let's go ahead and talk about some of these cons or feature set issues. 1. Octane cannot use true rendered displacement. What do I mean by this? Well, here we go. Here is a physical render of this ground that I've displaced with a free texture that I got from a website called Quexel Megascans. Now, what I'm going to go ahead and do is let's go ahead and look at this with the Cinema 4D render. This took, the Octane render. This took 16 seconds, 14.75 times faster than the physical render. This again is of course much faster, and again we're seeing the benefits of Octane, but the con is, even though from this distance we can't see it, there's actually a big difference. If we go ahead and zoom in on the physical render geometry that took 6 minutes, this right here is true geometry displacement. We can see each polygon kind of being bent up and displaced, and the overall shape that we're getting here. Now, if I go ahead and move on to the Octane render one that took, and this particular render here took 53 seconds, 6.8 times faster, so still faster, you can see that this is made up of all these tiny, tiny little planes. This is not true geometry displacement. What Octane does is it basically dices up your object into a bunch of subdivisions of these little planes that are floating here, not connected, and they all tilt and point towards the camera. Now again, from a distance, this illusion is perfect. It looks so dang good. But as soon as you get close to it, the illusion is broken. Of course, it doesn't look that great in the physical render either, but there is some drawbacks. Again, the geometry is not attached to itself, and you can get these black lines kind of on the edging here if you get real close. Notice you'll see that in the background here, which is not present on true geometry displacement. Now, of course, there is a way around this. You could simply just use the displacer object in Cinema 4D and just displace it that way in your viewport, and it would render just like this in Octane. But again, you can't do it on a per material basis like you're used to in Cinema 4D, so that is a drawback. Next up, Octane cannot render custom AOVs. Now, if you don't know what AOVs are, this is probably not going to impact you too much. But AOVs are basically different compositing layers that you can use. Now, other render engines like Cinema 4D Physical Render, Arnold Render, and Redshift do tend to have a more robust AOV system, such as Redshift does contain something called a puzzle mask. And again, if you don't know what these are, you're probably not going to miss them. But basically, all these different big names like AOV or puzzle mask is just basically more advanced compositing options. Basically giving you options such as being able to bake out a pass on the reflection color on the side of a soda can or something, so that in post you can change the color of those reflections on that soda can. Or say you wanted to composite out just any color in your scene that for some reason, like a puzzle mask, say you said anything that is this color red, make a mask for it. You could do that with something like Redshift. Octane does not have that feature yet. It's a little limited in the multi-pass department, but this said, it's still very robust, and we're going to be learning a lot about it. Now, in my case, this isn't that big of a deal for me, because needing to be able to change the color of my reflections in post based off a specific pass like that isn't necessarily something I'd have to have. I would just change the color of the whole can, which I could just bulk multi-pass that out, so just the specific reflection or specific color of that metallic material. I don't have to be as detailed on that, and I really have no need to set a puzzle mask to render out a mask just for anything that was, say, like a red or a blue color. I would just kind of plan ahead for that, just make my own mask for those specific objects or areas. But again, this might be something important to you, so that's something to be aware of. Next up is Octane does not support light linking. Again, if you don't know what light linking is, it's probably not going to be something that affects you much at all. This is basically the ability where you can link two lights together. So I can change one light, and changing that light will affect all the lights together. This can be really handy if you have like a bunch of lights in your scene that, say you got like 50 spotlights shining everywhere and you want to control them all at once based off of one light. That could be pretty handy. Now, Octane does not support that. But then again, so does Cinema 4D. I really don't think Cinema 4D supports that either. I could be wrong, though. I've never used this before, though. So for me, this isn't a big deal either, because I've never really used it or had a need for it. But again, this is something to be aware of. Finally, we're also just kind of re-mentioning what we've already talked about, like our custom AOVs. Octane has a less flexible multi-pass system than some other render engines. Now, again, it's still very robust, and there's tons of controls, and we'll be learning more about that in this course. But again, it's not quite as advanced as, say, Arnold or Redshift. So if multi-pass compositing, and I'm talking very, very intense multi-pass compositing, where you're talking 20 layers deep in like a Photoshop file or something you export out from every export is important to you, Octane may not be the best option to go with right yet. This said, go ahead and look up the options that Octane does have in its multi-pass, or if you bought this course already, go ahead and check out the multi-pass section of this course and go ahead and see if this is something that is worth your time or not. Next up, again, this is just multi-pass. I forgot I should have gone to the slide when I was talking about it, but again, Octane is limited on multi-pass. Next up is, this is a big one. Octane Render does not have third-party render farm support, and I know this is kind of shocking. But basically, unlike Redshift or Arnold or Cinema 4D Physical Render, you cannot simply upload your content to a third-party render farm company and render that for you. Octane does not support it. There is legal reasons for this, and I'm not going to go into the details of that. You can contact them if you want. They'll give you information on it, but there is specific legal reasons why. Now, I say no third-party render farm support. That does not mean there is no render farm support at all. Octane themselves has their own render farm service that is really big and really powerful, and is actually a topic that would take me much longer than this course has time for. So just realize that there is some big stuff that are game-changing, in my opinion, working with Octane and render farm support in their own system. So they have their own cloud rendering service. There's going to be something called render tokens and all kinds of other crazy stuff. I'm not going to get into it, but just realize this is most definitely going to be less of an issue in the very near future. So go ahead and look up render token, look up Octane render farm, check some of that stuff out. I can't talk about that in this video because it is just literally far beyond the scope of this. But moving on, again, we talked about render farms. Next up is Octane has affordable pricing options. This part is great. Now, you have two ways of buying Octane if you decide you want to get it. The first way is you must purchase the Octane standalone application plus the Octane C4D plugin. Now, if you have already the Octane standalone application, you can buy the C4D plugin, or if you don't have either of them, you can buy them in a combo for $619 at the time of making this video. This price point may have changed, so I recommend you check that out for yourself. But at the time of making this video, these were the prices that were listed. So again, you must buy Octane standalone plus the C4D plugin to be able to use the C4D plugin in Cinema 4D. So you must have both. They must be together. Now, say you don't actually have $619 right now to put down on a single license of Octane in the Cinema 4D plugin. That's okay. You can also move to the subscription module. This is the Octane plus C4D Octane combo for $20 a month. Basically, you get the Cinema 4D Octane plugin that works without the standalone Octane program. It doesn't actually come with it, but it comes with them both together, packed in the plugin, that work together. You don't have to have the Octane standalone application. In this case, you just get the plugin, you install it in Cinema 4D for $20 a month, and you are good to go. Literally, for $20 a month, you have the full complete package. Now, there is some limitations. No network rendering, which means you cannot use, and this is another thing that I forgot to mention, you can't use third-party render farms from somebody else, but you can use your own render farm. So if you have other computers, you can link them all together and do all of that, which is great. Now, the limitation of that is that you must have a copy on each system. So it doesn't have to be the C4D plugin, but you do have to link in the Octane standalone application. So if you have, say, 3 computers, your computer has the plugin, you want to render that with other ones, the other 2 computers that you want to render with must have at least the Octane standalone application for $399, but you don't have to have the $269 plugin on all those. So that's a benefit. With this is completely restricted. There is no network rendering, no render farming on that you're just simply not allowed to use that for this subscription module, and you're only allowed 2 GPUs per computer. So you are severely limited on your render potential on that system. But again, this is an option for companies that need something a little bit more affordable. Now, the subscription benefits is access to purchase the Octane Render Cloud Time. Now, at the time of making this video, the Octane Render Farm in the cloud like that is only currently available or open for people who have a subscription to the Octane C4D plugin. I'm afraid that anybody else who actually owns the Octane standalone application or the Octane C4D plugin standalone, where you purchase it outright, does not currently have access to it. Now, that said, don't worry, it's not going to stay like that. They have very big plans to open it up for everybody, including people who aren't even doing renders for Octane, renders for other things. They have a huge plan for this whole render token and render farm thing, which I really encourage you to check out. But at the time, this is how it is. Next up, let's go ahead and talk about that Octane render farm workflow. Say you want to set up your own render farm. Again, this is your first computer. You have Cinema 4D, costs you this. Octane standalone costs you that, and Octane C4D plugin. This computer is capable of doing modeling, lighting, texturing, and rendering. Now say you have two other computers that are set up just the same. If you want to use them to render with, you don't have to have Cinema 4D. You don't have to have Octane C4D plugin. All you just have to have is the Octane standalone application. This means each computer is only going to cost you additional $399 to add them to that rendering. You don't have to have Cinema 4D. You don't have to have the plugin. So that can save you money there. On top of this, just because you spent that $399 does not mean that this Octane standalone application is a render node. This is not a render node. You know how with Arnold or other programs they'll literally charge you just for a render node, which was like $500 or $800, literally just to have a computer dedicated to only be able to render when another computer sends it? This is not the case with Octane Render. You can still work on this while this computer is doing its own job. So he can send this scene to you, and you can still do lighting, texturing, and rendering inside the Octane standalone application and keep working on that and then render it out yourself. Or you can simply work with all three computers on the same network and render one project all at once. So again, these guys don't simply have to be dedicated render farm units anymore. You can actually work on them as their own system. So for smaller companies that can't afford to have computers dedicated as a render farm unit, but can't afford buying literal copies of Cinema 4D on every unit, you can still split your work up. So the guy up here can do the modeling and do a little bit of texturing and rendering, send it off to this guy and this guy over here, and they can continue the lighting and texturing rendering in the Octane standalone application. And then if the first guy up here has another job he wants to have as a render farm, you can accommodate to that, and you can be flexible and do a group render farm altogether. But moving on, let's go ahead and talk about how Octane has a fast and powerful workflow. This is definitely a big pro and a benefit. Now this is a big set of really cool features that I want to talk about here, so I'm actually going to divide this up into a few pieces. One of them is a slightly new feature to Octane called the triplanar mapping. If you haven't heard of this before, it's a really awesome feature where you can basically take a material that's not designed to be seamless, like say this material here. See how we have all these seams popping up on our object? And if I turn triplanar on, it'll instantly make it seamless and blend those seams together. Really dang cool. You can throw this on any geometry regardless of its UVs and it will just simply friggin' work. It's friggin' amazing. I'm really excited about this feature and I use it quite heavily, and this is just a big benefit of using Octane compared to just Cinema 4D physical render, which does not have triplanar mapping at this time. So that is a big pro. Next up is Octane Scatter. You thought that the cloner in Cinema 4D was cool? The Octane Scatter blows that out of the water. You can scatter, I've done 1 million objects at one point with Octane Scatter, and it still was able to not crash and actually work. This case is much more smaller. This is 7.5 thousand Ludwig trees scattered. Now there's more trees than you can actually see in the scene here because I overdid it. But there's a friggin' lot of trees here, and they look really nice, and you can have a big mixture of them. Now remember that big issue we had with Octane Render and the VRAM limit? Well, what's so nice with this is that the Octane Scatter object we have here simply creates instances. That means I'm only using about, I think, 2 gigs of VRAM for all these trees, even though this would easily exceed 100 gigs of VRAM if they were all their own individual object. But because I instance them, they don't take up any more VRAM. Only the original object takes it up. So I took 2 gigs of trees in VRAM and simply made clones and instances of them and spread them everywhere with literally no cost in VRAM taken up on that. So there is workarounds to that VRAM limit, which you can see here can give you some pretty gorgeous and really nice results. Next up is the IPR window. Interactive Picture Render is what that stands for, IPR, and this is a huge benefit. Now, to help kind of show the differences between the physical render workflow and the Octane render workflow, I have 2 examples running here. Both have been sped up by 2 times just to speed things up a little bit. On the left we have our physical render, and on the right we have the Octane render workflow. Now notice how with Octane render I'm able to adjust colors on the fly right now. We're doing some like blue cubes, now switching to green, and everything is updating instantly. Whereas over there in the physical render we're now just starting to kind of get a glimpse of what the scene looks like, and we're now trying a different color, going back to red. Whereas with Octane we're able to pan around and get live updates instantly as I make changes. There is no pausing, there is no waiting to see what it's going to look like. I see what it looks like as soon as I stop dragging the slider. It is instant. This type of workflow is so much quicker and faster and really does improve productivity and also makes the experience of creating that much more enjoyable. But next up, let's go ahead and talk about another benefit, and that is mix materials. This is cool. This is basically one cool thing with Octane where you have, and I'm not going to go into too much detail on this, but Octane has a bunch of material types. So you can make glass, you can make water, you can make stone, you can make rock, you can make reflections, any type of material you've ever want, like car paint or anything you've ever really wanted to make, you can make with Octane material-wise. What's cool is you can mix two materials together. So here I made a realistic looking stone material. This is based off of some gravel. I took a picture of in my backyard and ran that through Substance bitmap to material and created this. And then over here is a glass material that I made. And you can see I'm morphing with the use of something called a mix material to mix these two together. So you can see one side is rock and one side is glass. And you are really not limited at all. You can make any type of two materials and mix them together. And there's even something called an uber material, or a blend material, I think it's called now. And you can blend even more materials together. You are not limited. Next up is the node editor. And this is one of the biggest benefits of moving to Octane from Cinema 4D Physical Render, is you'll have access to the amazing node editor. In my opinion, the node editor is one of the biggest benefits. To make materials inside of this, it looks a little daunting at first. I know you're probably a little intimidated by this, but trust me, you've probably heard this said over and over, and I'm going to teach you in this course how to use the node editor. I'm going to walk you through it step by step, and by the end of that course, you're going to be a master of the node editor, and you're going to come to love it just as much as I do, because it makes working so much easier. Right here, I'm actually using a series of mixed materials to blend a bunch of lights with this final render over here. So this is a limitation of Octane, is I wasn't actually able to take one emissive material and have its colors change based off of like a gradient or something. At the time of making it, they might have changed this now. But basically, I just took a bunch of, this is basically like a liquid I have in here. And I have the liquid set to emit light. And I have, I think, 7 different liquids that I've blended together and created this rainbow effect. And this was so pretty straightforward and simple to do with the node editor. It would have been a nightmare to do it in a layer-based system inside the Cinema 4D render. It just, first off, this is impossible to do in the Cinema 4D render. Have an object that's transparent like this that would emit light through glass with proper caustics. It just would not have happened. It would have been a nightmare. It just could not be a thing. But again, this node editor made this process so much easier. And so many times the node editor has really been just such a helpful tool. This will make you work faster, quicker, be much more flexible, and overall have much higher productivity in your work. Not to mention, it'll help you keep your sanity on more of those complex projects just because it's so much dang easier. So I'll really recommend giving this a try. This is a huge benefit, which of course we'll be teaching you throughout this course, so you really don't have to be too stressed or worried about this, because we're going to go move through it very slowly, and before you know it, you're going to fall in love with this node editor. But next up, Octane is hard to learn due to very little documentation. Again, this is a definite big con, a con that I hope my course is going to remedy. Definitely hope that the Octane Master Course, again, Octane is difficult to learn, understand, and this is specifically because it has very little documentation and an unusual naming and functioning system. So learning Octane Render by yourself can be a little hard because of how it names things. Octane Render tends to name things in very unusual ways. So if you're just trying to stumble through and try to figure out your things yourself, just trying to guess how it would do something, that's going to be really hard, because a lot of times Octane is not going to work like you think it should or think it would. You have to first have some type of documentation, usually, explaining this is how it works, and once you understand it, it's much easier to move forward. This said, sadly, there isn't much documentation. So for a lot of times, you just keep trying a bunch of parameters and wonder why it doesn't work until eventually, by out of sheer luck, it ends up working. That is kind of a big pain and not a very great way of learning Octane. So that is exactly why I've made this Octane Master Course, because I feel like Octane has such potential to reach out and help the industry, like create some really good content and to help people bring their artistic visions to life. And it's a really powerful, really powerful program to express yourself artistically in 3D. And the only thing that's really friggin' limiting it is the tutorials out there. It's just there's so little documentation on it, so many functions and features and possibilities that Octane has that's simply not shown, simply based off of the fact that there's nobody or no documentation or nothing written out there to help show people how to do it. And that is exactly why I made the Octane Master Course, because I want to take that issue and get rid of it. I want to put the power back into your hands to use Octane. I want to give you the ability to make what you want to make. I want to go ahead and explain the process of how to make and how to use Octane to do what you want it to do in an easy step-by-step setup. Every video and everything in this entire course is going to be ordered from A to Z, from 1 to 100, or how many videos there might be in this course. It's going to constantly keep growing. But basically, if you don't know about Octane Render at all, and you're starting out for the first time, and you don't even know where to begin, it's okay. Simply start in the beginning. Start at video 1. I have everything in an orderly, structured setup. So if you start at 1, it'll prep you for video 2. Once you watch video 2, you'll be prepped for video 3, and so on. You can go through it in a step-by-step structured series where at the end you'll be completely a master of Octane Render. Now, say you're an advanced user and you've been using Octane for years and you don't want to learn the basics. You already know them. That's okay. I have everything also set up where you can go ahead and jump to whatever video you want. If you already know about the Octane interface and Live Viewer and how to make your own custom layout, and you already have all that down, and you've already learned the basics of materials, hop into the advanced section. Learn about the details, the robust multi-pass system, making an infinite floor object, mixing your HDRI environment and your daylight object together to have massive control of your lights, rendering and creating smoke and fire simulations, and how to adjust the light and the color of that. Go into the detailed, in-depth stuff right off the bat. That's okay. I have this designed to be the resource center, the companion that for any 3D Octane render artist, where they can simply pick it up and no matter what your skill level, jump into it and get the information you need. But again, enough of me rattling on about this. Let's go ahead and finish everything up with what did we just learn. In this video, we learned Octane Render can save you money. That's a big bonus. That's a pretty nice thing to have. So that's a good thing to know. Next up, GPU rendering is faster and cheaper than CPU rendering. That was a big thing we learned, and quite honestly, one of the biggest selling points for Octane is its speed and how affordable it is compared to a CPU rendering option. Next up, we learned a con. That is, Octane is limited GPU's VRAM. That said, though, this isn't that big of a deal because they do have bigger and bigger VRAM GPUs coming out now. At this time, the biggest one out I know now is 24 gigs of VRAM on I think it's $5,000, so it is a little pricey. But that said, too, Octane is very efficient at storing a lot of data in its graphic card. I believe it's about, 2,000 polygons will take a gig. It's about like that. Yeah, so you could probably hold about 8,000 polygons in your scene in a 4 gig card, and then most cards nowadays are 8 gigs. Or even higher, 11 gigs. So that, again, it's not too big of a deal. And, of course, if you run instancing and instance your geometry, you're going to have even less of a problem than that because literally 8,000 polygons of trees can be instanced to look really dang good. So that is definitely not too big of a deal in most cases. Next up, we learned Octane does not support third-party render farms at this time. But, again, that issue does not mean you can't use a render farm. You can still use Octane's render cloud that they have themselves if you're using the subscription version for now, but that is going to be remedied very quick where the new Octane render cloud system is going to be opened up complete with the render token system, which I'm not going to go into too much detail on, but it is going to be, in my opinion, just groundbreaking in what this means for the industry, not just for Octane users, but for video game users, other render programs out there. It's going to be huge. It's very big. Definitely check out Render Token. Give that a search. Octane can be hard to learn by yourself. That is so true, and I've already talked so much about that, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. But again, I'm going to hopefully remedy that issue with the Octane Master Course teaches you everything you ever wanted to know about Octane Render in Cinema 4D. So again, I really hope that this course is going to remedy that issue. And again, this is going to be a subscription, not really a subscription system, it's going to be a membership. So after your whole year membership expires, you don't have to renew. You're going to keep everything you've already paid for. You're not going to lose it. Basically, all you're getting out of this membership is just benefits, and your benefits are throughout that whole year of your purchase of Octane, you are constantly going to get live support from me in our Discord channel, and you're also going to get continuous updates to the entire course. When Octane version 4 comes out, it might be out already when you're watching this video, I am going to have updates coming out for every single video showing you how to use all of those new features. But at this point, this video is done. Thank you so much for watching this. I really do hope you found it helpful, and I cannot wait to see you all in the Octane Master Course.